Chimeir is a distant planet. It is defined by waves of life brought from Earth and set free to evolve independently in this new context. The indigenous life of the planet, swarms of microbes called magic by the people who live there, or would harvest Earth organisms and make copies on Chimeir. As the asteroid which concluded the Mesozoic never struck Chimeir, dinosaurs remain the dominant terrestrial megafauna. The first children were Chimeir's first major civilization. Little is known of these ancient peoples with much certainty. They were small in stature, averaging just under a meter as adults. Their origins are from some distant realm on the planet that, through folklore, suggests a calamity of some sort being prelude to their arrival in the known world. After some time in Picardia, the first children slaughtered all the native megafauna of Qajar around 13,000 years ago and established this peninsula as their new home. Their most notable achievement was the domestication of numerous strains of wild magic. To protect their new home, the first children grew a great wall along the neck of the peninsula to keep out more dangerous mainland megafauna. They then manipulated numerous aspects of the Great Portal, influencing its satellites to stabilize and enhance the hydration of the Qajarith Peninsula, amplifying its territorial markers, and trap the portal itself into a device that not only could be controlled when it harvested with a simple open and close, dramatically decreasing how long it took the data to get between planets, it also allowed travel to and from Earth, rather than just taking from Earth and copying in Chimeir. The first children used their domesticated magic for a wide range of more personal applications than were refined over time, such as the enchantment of grains, extending their own lifespan, and creating magical life forms. Though wild magic can bond with a host animal, sometimes resulting in extremely powerful wild demons, the first children refined these strains to make increasingly complex homunculi that would be the labor backbone of their society. There are, broadly speaking, 3 classes or grades of homunculi. Class 1 are humans with slight magical enhancements. These are quite similar to wild demons, but on a larger and more controlled scale. Class 2 homunculi are heavily modified by magic, but still each their own individual entity. Giants, harpies, and other magical beings are generally classified in this group. Class 3 homunculi are strains of magic with a favored body blueprint linked to them, and they can modify any host they occupy to eventually resemble their encoded body. Class 3 homunculi are often called greater demons. The exact distinction between these 3 grades is a bit subjective, but in broad strokes it helps the Great Library, and by extension the Assembly, classify them. The classes ascend in complexity and broadly correspond to the 3 major eras of the first children history in Qajar. The reign of the first children in Qajar, from their culling of the peninsula 13,000 years ago until circa 11,000 years ago, is often called the First Age. By events only broadly understood through reliable sources, the first children civilization collapsed around 11,000 years ago. According to oral tradition of many Chimerian peoples, in some cases passed directly from homunculi still living who claimed to have witnessed it, the homunculi were all granted free will and was shortly followed by a violent revolution. As many of the structures and vehicles are made of organic materials, mainly bamboo, the later years of the first children especially has a poor archaeological record. Details of this oral history are hard to verify, though the core of how the first children seems to bear out, as it was a pulse of violent conflicts at their conclusion. What led to this collapse is poorly understood, but it is known that the First Age ended in war and presumed extinction of the first children. Some homunculi departed Qajar after they were free of their creators, but many remained. The majority of this population were drones, class 1 and 2 homunculi. Some had longer lives, but for the most part these lesser demons lived quite like people. The enchanted grains of the first children were maintained to support this population. Their leaders, however, were the class 3 homunculi, or greater demons. Some cooperated in more complex factions, but according to oral tradition and some archaeological support, most established their own independent territories throughout Qajar, with resources provided by their drones in exchange for protection. It was under their rule that a new age of Chimeran history began. The Second Age. The Age of Demons. This period of history is spoken of by Chimerans with abject horror, an era of fear. Their ancestors lived in isolated settlements, ever afraid of raiding demons. Abductions were allegedly commonplace, and there is a popular image of people being collected as food for the greater demons. It must be stressed that this neither is supported nor refuted by available material evidence. There are precious few translated accounts of the era, and even if there were more, it is difficult to parse out bias. Even so, the popular image of the Age of Demons has captured the imagination of Chimerans, and is how it is often presented and understood to this day. It did not take long for some demons to take their drones and establish new territories beyond Qajar. Nikar, numerous Kaline Islands, and Picardia all had settlements of homunculi, and there's some evidence that few may have even voyaged far beyond the known world. These sailors throughout the known world took with them a variety of enchanted grains and, more importantly, soil from Qajar, as many enchanted crops are extremely sensitive. These satellite communities were not nearly as successful as those who remained in Qajar. While it is said that this is because the land of their creators was blessed for them, the reality is likely that through natural and manufactured means, Qajar is extremely amiable to enchanted agriculture in a way that few other places in Chimeir are. Kadan, the Empire, Picardia, and the Kaline Islands all have their strains and modifications of these enchanted domesticated crops, but Qajar still produces more than all other nations combined. This was presumably the case back in the Age of Demons too, hence it having much greater populations and the health of those living in Qajar. Comparison of drone skeletons in Qajar to those in other regions show a clear disparity in health. Drones outside of Qajar often show signs of severe malnourishment. There were powerful witches among these ancient Chimerans, and in the islands and pockets of Nikar they were able to maintain sovereignty against the demons. Though this age, these witches and their people persisted, though many were pushed into the highlands or increasingly remote areas. There is evidence, both archaeological and in Chimeran folklore, that there were conflicts between these factions of witches and demons, often resulting in the victory of the homunculi. Osteological studies suggest that Chimerans did not possess long lives at this time, and it seems that they were just as reliant upon their witches as the Class 1 homunculi were upon their demon lords. It became a common practice for these witches to make witch holts, caves or castles fortified with powerful magics that only they or non-magical beings could pass through, meaning the demons and their drones were unable to enter. These sanctuaries may well have saved at least some Chimeran peoples from annihilation. The Class 1 drones were created with unnatural features through homobox gene expression featuring other animals, though they are still genetically human. Based on several archaeological sites, it seems that these beings established their own populations. A lot of these traits were selected against. It is probable that some of this was natural selection, as they are expensive traits, not to mention the demands of the magic itself, But there is also evidence that these drones integrated with populations of Homo altus and Chimeirans, who at the time did not have much longer lifespans. Whatever the reason, over the course of the nearly 4,000 years of the Age of Demons, many Class 1 homunculi ended up looking quite human. These became the commoners during the Age of Demons. The same integration cannot be said of other homunculi classes. Many Class 2 homunculi, such as mermaids and harpies, reproduce with clones or by transfer of their genes to a human host who is then taken over by the strain. Ogres are debatably somewhere between Class 1 and 2, as they can sexually reproduce with each other and are, at the very least, smaller today than they were during their creation, though, as far as any know, they cannot reproduce with humans. The appearance of some greater demons in folklore is corroborated by archaeological discoveries. The Age of Demons is Chimeir's longest historical period, lasting from almost 11,000 years ago to 7,000, or circa 8,800 to 4,900 BC. By that metric, it was arguably the most successful. Qajar was by far its most abundant region, but many demon fiefs in territories beyond were still quite influential. Despite being spread over many thousands of miles, the fact that their leaders all knew one another likely facilitated their trade. Many of the demon lords in realms beyond came to Qajar for extra grain, as it seems they had space, abundant game, and minerals to trade with the greater demons in this agricultural center. There were likely conflicts between the demon lords, at least according to a wide range of art, the few surviving accounts and oral tradition. Allegedly, when a demon king was defeated in these conflicts, their subjects were either claimed in servitude by the victor or killed and eaten. Again, it is difficult to verify the truth in these accounts. Their governing system, wherein a few hundred greater demons controlled their subjects, appears to have been very stable despite legends of great demon wars. There is archaeological evidence for some minor conflicts, but for the most part it seems peace was status quo, at least under control of these greater demons. This is of course at odds with the Chimeran perception of the era. Scholars who make this point are often quick to say life under the subjugation of demon lords who would eat those who defied them isn't exactly life in a free world. Also, in a society so quick to kill the first children, presumably their lack of free will under their makers, this isn't a fundamentally different system of governance. A choice to be subjugated instead of having no say in the matter. This is all, of course, conjecture. There are some living demons old enough to remember the era, but all those in the assembly have been able to speak on those who left Qajar to live entirely independently, like merfolk, harpies, and giants. None of the demon lords or their subjects are directly known by the assembly, so perception of how people lived in the Age of Demons is largely speculation. Available evidence paints a picture of simple agricultural societies under governance of a few very powerful demons, and the minimal signs of conflict suggest this was a peaceful era of Chimeir's history. Despite this stability, it would not last forever. The cause of their collapse is unknown. It's been postulated that commoners became overpopulated and this triggered conflict over resources, but there's not much evidence to support this. It is true that commoner populations were quite high toward its end, circa 4,900 BC, but populations fluctuated and this was not their height. There's minimal sign of conflict, and only at the very end when things appear to already have been falling apart. What there is evidence for is a great plague. A pathogen of some sort swept through Qajar and many of its outlying territories. Though there is evidence for numerous diseases, an airborne virus is the most consistent and thought to have been the driving force of their collapse. As the commoners lost a vast majority of their population in a matter of months, an invasion of Chimeirans from mainland Arvel seems to have been the death knell of their civilization. These Chimeirans not only now had long lives, they were themselves led by powerful entities of their own. The Witch Kings. In this clash between the supernatural, the ancestors of Chimeirans were this time victorious. According to Kudrith folklore, these men were descended from the men originally expelled from Qajar. There is some evidence to support this, that pre-First Children Homo sapiens specimens examined show relationship to contemporary southern Arvelith humans and modern Kudrith peoples, though this is less certain if these people are directly descended. In Picardia and many of the islands, the Chimeirans descended from their witch holts and fought off demons in their realm. In a period as brief as a few months, though this exact timeline is disputed and difficult to verify, the known world experienced a dramatic turnover, with populations of homunculi entirely replaced by Chimeirans. In some Chimeran folklore, this turnover was a violent conflict with oppressive demons, while others say the demons perished on their own corrosive wickedness, and yet still more say they were driven from the land itself as it prepared for its rightful inhabitants. Most assembly texts on the matter stick to available evidence, which is not particularly abundant or insightful. Some stories say this turnover coincided with Chimeirans being granted long lives, either right before, right after, or indeed as a direct consequence. This is borne out by examining remains that died around this time, with long lives in Chimeran skeletons usually showing up after and presumably long-lived individuals, beforehand being witches. How and why Chimeirans achieved long lives is deeply tied to their religions, and studies into the matter are highly contentious and rarely pursued as a consequence. The Maku, or Selikith in the common tongue and Clegg in Picardiant, are a people found in Hyrule. They are at least partially indigenous Hyrulans, but they show signs of Homo sapiens, Homo altus, and Class I homunculi commoners. A popular interpretation is that they descend from some of the early voyages beyond the known world and landed in Hyrule. The Maku lead periodic voyages to the known world, mostly to Picardia, though a few have assaulted imperial lands to the north. So far, no permanent settlements have been established, though a few raids have brief occupation. A minority of scholars believe the Maku are descended not from the first homunculi expansion, but from refugees driven from the known world at the conclusion of the Age of Demons. Neither theory is supported by particularly strong evidence, but the idea that the Maku, being descended from refugees fleeing conquest instead of explorers in their own inspiration, is not popular among most Chimeran scholars. It is, however, more in line with legends the Maku have occasionally been documented to tell by the Assembly, who have described these raids as a pilgrimage, an effort to return home. This could mean either the land of their makers if they were voyagers, or the home they were driven from as refugees. Of course, both theories could be correct. As it is a source of contention with their hosts, most Assembly scholars are content to leave it ambiguous if not outright favor their voyager interpretation. Though the details of the end of the Second Age are heavily debated, what is known is that the conclusion of the Age of Demons was a direct prelude to the Age of Witches. Just as it was during the Age of Demons, this was a world defined by a few hundred powerful entities ruling over and protecting a common populace. It was witch lineages instead of greater demons, but fundamentally it was a similar structure. Qajar was where the greatest number of the most powerful witches resided, though others could be found throughout the known world. In our next episode, we will learn about the factions, abilities, and major player in the Third Age, the Age of Witches. Cheers to David for sponsoring this series. As certain aspects of the historical eras of Chimeire's history will play a major role in the plot of the main series, I was a bit hesitant to do these episodes in years past, but presenting it as what the Assembly and average Chimeir knows about the history through folklore and archaeology allows me to explore them without spoiling major plot points. Now, I've set the stage, as characters at the start of the series will understand major events and factions. Also, David is himself a fellow world builder and author. His channel, David's Writing Desk, has a lot of interesting and engaging episodes, including studies of fauna and the cultures of his fictional setting, Chimeir. Definitely recommend you go check it out. Thanks again to David, to my Patreon patrons for your support, and thank you for watching. Cheers, folks!